Have you ever stopped to wonder where the foundations of modern European fashion were truly laid? It might surprise you to learn that the answer reaches back not just a few centuries, but thousands of years, to the heart of the ancient world. While we often picture knights in armor or Victorian gowns as the pinnacle of historical European style, the real story begins much earlier, in the sun-drenched forums and bustling marketplaces of ancient Rome. From the iconic toga to intricate jewelry and finely crafted sandals, the Romans didn't just dress for practicality or status, they built a visual language of power, identity, and artistry that would ripple across continents and centuries, shaping what we now recognize as Western fashion. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome at the height of its power. You'd see senators draped in voluminous, purple-bordered togas, a garment so symbolic it was reserved for Roman citizens alone. You'd notice women in elegantly draped stolas, their attire communicating social standing, wealth, and even moral virtue. But the influence of Roman fashion didn't stop at the city's 7 hills. Through conquest, trade, and cultural exchange, Rome exported its aesthetic ideals across Europe, from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the Middle East. Luxurious fabrics like silk and dyed wool, intricate metalwork, and even hairstyles traveled along Roman roads, blending with local traditions and laying the groundwork for what would become a shared sartorial heritage. What's truly remarkable is how much of ancient Rome's style DNA still echoes in the fashion we see and wear today. Elements of Roman design, clean lines, draped silhouettes, and a focus on both function and form can be traced through the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and right into modern runways. In this video, we're going to unravel that enduring legacy. We'll explore how the humble tunic evolved into garments worn across medieval Europe, how Roman luxury influenced royal courts for generations, and why something as simple as a buckle or a brooch carried meanings that transcended time and geography. This isn't just a story about clothing, it's about how identity, culture, and human creativity are woven into the very fabric of history. So join me as we step back into the world of togas, tunics, and timeless style, and discover how ancient Rome dressed an empire, and in doing so, shaped the fashion of a continent. Of all the garments from the ancient world, none is more instantly recognizable than the Roman toga. But this iconic wrap was far more than just a simple piece of cloth. It was a wearable resume, a billboard of one's place in the highly structured Roman society. Its origins were surprisingly humble, beginning as a basic undyed wool blanket worn by early Romans for warmth and modesty. Yet as Rome grew from a small city-state into a vast empire, the toga underwent a dramatic transformation, evolving from a practical garment into the most potent symbol of Roman citizenship and civic virtue. To be seen in public wearing a toga was to announce to the world that you were a Roman citizen, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities that status entailed. It was literally the uniform of the ruling class, and its intricate rules of wear were a language everyone understood. The complexity of this language was expressed through a fascinating variety of styles, colors, and decorations, each communicating a specific message. The most common was the toga virilis, a plain, natural white wool worn by the average adult male citizen. Then there was the toga praetexta, distinguished by a broad purple border along its edge. This striking adornment was reserved for high-ranking magistrates and, interestingly, for freeborn boys, serving as a symbol of their protected status as future leaders. The most prestigious of all was the toga picta, a magnificent robe dyed entirely in rich Tyrian purple and embroidered with golden thread. This wasn't for just any senator, it was worn by triumphant generals during victory parades and later, by emperors themselves, solidifying its association with ultimate power and near-divine authority. There was even a toga for mourners, the dark toga pulla, and a bleached, brilliantly white toga candida, worn by candidates for public office, a literal attempt to appear pure and honest in their ambitions. Putting on a toga was an art form in itself, requiring the assistance of slaves or family members to achieve the proper, dignified drape. Its voluminous, non-restrictive nature made it utterly impractical for manual labor, which was precisely the point. Its wearer was declaring that they were a man of leisure and politics, not of physical work. This is why the toga became so deeply intertwined with the concept of Romanitas, the set of qualities that defined what it meant to be Roman. It represented civilization itself, standing in direct contrast to the trousers worn by the peoples Rome considered barbarians. As the empire expanded, the toga's role as a symbol of Roman identity became even more critical in provinces far from Italy, a visual reminder of the cultural and political center of the world. Its eventual decline in everyday use by the later empire wasn't just a change in fashion, it was a signal of the changing world as new influences and a shifting social order began to unravel the very fabric of Roman tradition. While the toga was the definitive public statement for Roman men, the women of Rome had their own equally sophisticated sartorial vocabulary centered on two iconic garments, the stola and the palla. For a married Roman woman of citizen status, the stola was non-negotiable. It was the visual embodiment of her respectability and virtue. This long, sleeveless dress, typically made from fine linen or wool, was worn over an under tunic and fastened at the shoulders by clasps called fibulae. Its defining feature was often a draped-over fold at the top, known as an instita, and sometimes a belt worn just under the bust, creating an elegant, flowing silhouette that emphasized modesty without sacrificing grace. The color and quality of the fabric spoke volumes. A matron from a wealthy family might wear a stola of expensive, brightly dyed wool or even shimmering silk imported from the East, while a woman of more modest means would have one in a simpler, undyed fabric. Wearing a stola was a proud declaration of one's role as a materfamilias, the honored mother of the household. Completing this respectable ensemble was the palla, a large, versatile rectangular wrap that could be draped over the head as a veil or across the shoulders for warmth and decorum. In many ways, the palla was the female equivalent of the toga, though far more practical for daily life. When a woman stepped out in public, she would almost always wear her palla, using it to cover her head as a sign of piety or to draw across her body for modesty. The way a woman managed her palla communicated subtle social cues. A firm, neat drape suggested composure and dignity, while a disheveled one could imply distress or impropriety. Like the stola, the palla's material indicated status. A common woolen version provided warmth, but a wealthy woman might own one of delicate, gossamer, thin silk, or even one embroidered with gold thread for special occasions. The influence of this elegant two-piece system of draped clothing on later European fashion is profound and often overlooked. The core principles of the stola and palla, modesty, layered draping, and the use of fabric to denote status, didn't vanish with the empire. Instead, they were absorbed and adapted. We can see clear echoes in the long, flowing gowns and veils of the Byzantine Empire, which directly inherited Roman traditions. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, artists and intellectuals looking back to classical antiquity for inspiration revived these draped forms. The soft, unstructured lines of garments and paintings from this period, often featuring gowns with high waists and shawls draped over the head or shoulders, are a direct homage to Roman ideals of female elegance. Even into the 19th century, the neoclassical movement saw fashionable women in Europe and America adopting high-waisted, columnar empire waist dresses that closely mirrored the silhouette of the stola, seeking to connect themselves to the perceived virtue and beauty of the ancient Roman matron. The legacy of these garments is a testament to how Roman ideas of female propriety and aesthetic elegance were woven into the very fabric of Western culture, enduring long after the last emperor ruled. Yet for all the symbolic power of the toga and the dignified elegance of the stola, if you were to walk through ancient Rome on any given day, the garment you would see on nearly everyone was the humble tunica. This was the true workhorse of the Roman wardrobe, a simple, practical tunic that served as the universal base layer for an entire empire. Worn by men, women, and children across all social classes, its design was brilliantly straightforward. Two rectangular pieces of wool or linen sewn together at the sides and shoulders, with openings for the head and arms. Its genius lay in its adaptability. For a poor laborer or a slave, it might be a short, coarse, and undyed shirt that allowed for freedom of movement in the fields or workshops. For a senator at home, it could be a longer, finer linen version, often worn underneath his formal toga. This was the garment of real life, the comfortable and functional clothing that powered the daily routines of millions. The details of a person's tunica were a silent but clear broadcast of their status. The length, the quality of the fabric, and especially the presence or absence of stripes told a detailed story. Most citizens wore a plain, knee-length version. However, for those of higher rank, distinctive colored stripes called clavi were woven into the fabric. A senator's tunica featured broad purple stripes running vertically from each shoulder to the hem, while an equestrian, the wealthy class just below senators, wore a tunic with narrower purple stripes. This simple coding system meant that even without his toga, a Roman man's social standing was immediately apparent. The tunica's practicality was further enhanced by how it was worn. It was often cinched at the waist with a belt or cord, which could be used to shorten the garment for physical activity. A farmer could hike it up to keep it clean, and a soldier could adjust it for marching. This combination of simple design and clear social signaling made the tunica the indispensable foundation of Roman dress. The influence of this basic garment on the future of European fashion cannot be overstated. When the Roman Empire in the West fragmented, the daily clothing of its people did not simply disappear. Instead, the tunica evolved, seamlessly blending into the wardrobes of the emerging medieval world. The Roman tunica is the direct ancestor of the long, slip-on tunics worn by Anglo-Saxons, Franks, and Vikings. You can see the lineage clearly in the Bayeux tapestry, where both Norman knights and English soldiers are depicted wearing garments that are fundamentally evolved Roman tunics. This style persisted for centuries as the standard attire for men and women throughout the Middle Ages, its basic T-shaped construction remaining largely unchanged. The practicality that made it so popular in Rome, ease of sewing, comfort, and versatility ensured its survival long after the legions were gone. It was the perfect blank canvas, readily adaptable to different climates, materials, and local decorative traditions, providing a continuous sartorial thread that connected the ancient world to the dawn of the modern era. Moving from the garments that clothed the body to what protected the feet, we find another area where Roman ingenuity left a permanent imprint. The Romans understood that footwear was far more than a simple necessity. It was a critical tool for conquest, a marker of civilization, and a clear indicator of one's place in the social hierarchy. For the soldiers who marched across continents to build the empire, the most iconic footwear was the caligae, a heavy-soled military sandal that was as practical as it was distinctive. These were not delicate sandals for a stroll through the forum. They were engineered for war, constructed from a single, thick piece of leather cut into a pattern that wrapped around the foot. The upper was a web of sturdy leather straps that provided excellent ventilation, preventing the blisters and fungal infections that could cripple an army on long campaigns in hot climates. The sole was the true masterpiece, studded with dozens of iron hobnails that were hammered in from the inside. This created a tough, gripping surface that gave legionaries traction on muddy ground and rocky terrain alike, while also making the sandals repairable. A soldier could simply replace a worn hobnail in the field. The unmistakable sound of an entire cohort marching in these sandals, a rhythmic, metallic clattering on stone roads, would have been a terrifying herald of Roman power to those who heard it approaching. But the caligae's influence extended far beyond its military use. Its fundamental design principles, durability, breathability, and a sole designed for grip were revolutionary. We can trace a direct line from these ancient sandals to the outdoor and work footwear of later centuries. The heavily nailed boots worn by medieval European soldiers and laborers, for instance, were a clear evolution of this Roman technology. Even today, the cleats on a football boot or the aggressive tread on a hiking shoe serve the same essential purpose as those Roman hobnails, to provide stability and traction under demanding conditions. For life within the city walls and for those of higher social standing, the open caligae was considered too rustic and informal. Here, the shoe of choice was the calceus, a fully enclosed leather shoe that was a mandatory part of the formal Roman citizen's outfit when wearing a toga. Wearing closed shoes was itself a sign of civilization, distinguishing the Romans from barbarian peoples who often wore boots or simple foot wraps. The calceus was meticulously crafted from soft, high-quality leather and was available in specific styles and colors that denoted rank. A common citizen might wear a simple, functional version, but a senator's calceus was distinctive, dyed a rich red and fastened with 4 sets of leather laces that wrapped around the ankle. This specific style, sometimes referred to as the calceus patricius, was a powerful visual cue of authority and status. The Roman emphasis on specialized footwear for different occasions and classes planted a seed in European fashion that would flourish for millennia. The idea that a gentleman should own different shoes for different purposes, riding boots, formal shoes, indoor slippers, is a concept that finds its roots in Roman practice. Furthermore, the Roman method of constructing shoes on a last, a foot-shaped form, was a significant technological advancement that allowed for more fitted and comfortable footwear. This technique spread throughout the empire and became the standard across Europe, forming the basis of shoemaking craft guilds in the Middle Ages and beyond. From the pragmatic design of the legionary sandal to the symbolic power of the senator's red shoe, Roman footwear established a legacy of combining function with social meaning, a principle that continues to resonate in every pair of shoes we choose to wear today. Beyond the practical layers of togas, stolas, and tunics, the ancient Romans understood the power of detail. Their true flair for personal expression, their bling, came from the intricate world of accessories and jewelry. In a society where your clothing could announce your rank, your jewelry whispered the finer details of your wealth, your taste, and your connections across the vast empire. For the Romans, adornment was not merely decorative. It was a sophisticated language of metal, gemstone, and glass that spoke of status, allegiance, and identity. The most functionally important accessory was the fibula, an elegant and ingenious brooch that was the precursor to the modern safety pin. These were not the clumsy fasteners we might imagine. They were often exquisitely crafted works of art, designed to securely hold the heavy folds of a cloak or the drape of a stola in place while also serving as a prominent display of the wearer's wealth. Fibulae came in a stunning variety of shapes and styles, from simple bows for everyday use to elaborate, gold-plated disc brooches, intricately decorated with mythological scenes or portraits of the emperor. A legionary might wear a more utilitarian bronze fibula to secure his military cloak, but his commanders would be made of silver, perhaps even inset with a precious gem. The fibula was so essential to Roman dress that its design and technology spread like wildfire along the empire's trade routes and frontiers. This is where we see one of the most direct and tangible examples of Roman influence on European style. Celtic and Germanic metalworkers, already highly skilled, encountered the advanced techniques and designs of Roman fibulae. They didn't just copy them, they absorbed the ideas and then reinterpreted them through their own distinct artistic lens, creating stunning hybrid pieces that featured both Roman motifs and traditional Celtic spirals or Germanic animal styles. This cultural exchange transformed local adornment traditions, elevating the complexity and prestige of jewelry across the continent. The legacy of the fibula is utterly enduring. Its basic spring mechanism is the foundation of every pin and clasp we use today, and the brooches worn by medieval Europeans, from the Anglo-Saxons to the Vikings, are direct descendants of these Roman originals. For more personal and potent displays of status, Romans turned to rings and necklaces. A gold ring, known as an annulus, was a powerful symbol of citizenship and social standing. While iron rings were common, the right to wear a gold ring was originally a privilege granted by the emperor to the equestrian and senatorial classes, making it an instant visual cue of elite membership. These rings often featured an engraved gemstone or a carved intaglio, where a design was cut down into the stone so that it could be pressed into warm wax to create a seal. Your signet ring was your signature, a guarantee of your word and your authority, making it one of the most personally significant items a Roman could own. Necklaces, too, were layered with meaning. Both men and women of means wore them, from simple gold chains to more elaborate pieces featuring pendants. Popular designs included the bulla, a protective locket worn by freeborn children, and pendants depicting gods, goddesses, or even miniature portraits of loved ones, serving as both amulet and affectionate keepsake. The materials used in this jewelry tell a story of a vast and interconnected economic network, while the wealthy flaunted pieces crafted from gold mined in Dacia or Spain and adorned with emeralds, pearls, and sapphires imported from India and Egypt. A thriving market existed for beautiful imitations that made luxury accessible to the middle classes. Roman glassmakers became unparalleled masters of illusion, creating stunning glass beads and gemstones that brilliantly mimicked more expensive materials. They developed techniques to produce a spectacular iridescent glass that resembled precious opal and could craft a convincing fake pearl from glass and silver foil. This democratization of style meant that a merchant's wife in Roman Britain could own a necklace that, from a distance, appeared just as splendid as one worn by a noblewoman in Rome itself. This desire for affordable luxury, fueled by Roman industrial production and trade, ensure that these aesthetic ideals and the techniques to create them were exported to every corner of the empire, planting the seeds for the jewelry-making traditions that would define medieval and Renaissance Europe for centuries to come. While the cut of a toga or the style of a sandal spoke volumes in ancient Rome, some of the most intricate and status-driven conversations happened entirely without words, right on top of a person's head. Roman hairstyles, particularly for women, were not just about aesthetics. They were complex architectural achievements, carefully constructed declarations of wealth, fashion forwardness, and moral standing. For the elite women of Rome, hair was a primary canvas for self-expression and social competition. They achieved these spectacular looks with an arsenal of tools and techniques that would feel familiar in a modern salon: curling irons, hairpins, needles, and pomades made from animal fats. But they also employed some truly ancient secrets, using everything from bleaching agents made with soda and vinegar to dyes concocted from crushed walnut shells for brown or leeches fermented in vinegar for a fashionable black. The most sought-after color, however, was a light blonde or auburn, often achieved with expensive powders and saffron, or for those who could afford it, elaborate wigs made from the hair of Germanic captives, a grim reminder of the empire's reach and the brutal economies that supported its luxury. The most powerful trendsetters were, without a doubt, the empresses. Their evolving hairstyles were meticulously documented in sculptures and coins, creating a de facto fashion magazine for the entire empire to follow. Early imperial styles, like those favored by Livia, wife of Augustus, were relatively modest, featuring a center part and a simple, elegant bun at the nape of the neck, reflecting the conservative values her husband promoted. But as the empire grew more prosperous and ornate, so did its hair. The Flavian period under Emperor Domitian saw the rise of an extraordinary style often called the tutulus, a towering mass of curls and braids built high above the forehead like a crown. This look required immense skill, hours of work from teams of skilled slaves, and likely a great deal of back-combing and hairpieces to achieve its impressive height. Later, Empress Julia Domna popularized a completely different silhouette in the 3rd century, a helmet of tight, intricate waves that framed her face like a nimbus, a style that projected a powerful, almost divine authority. These imperial trends trickled down through the ranks of Roman society, with every matron and merchant's wife aspiring to emulate, in their own modest way, the latest look from the palace. This classical obsession with hair as a symbol of status and sophistication did not die with the last Roman emperor. It lay dormant, preserved in marble and manuscript, until it was spectacularly resurrected over 1,000 years later during the Italian Renaissance. As artists and intellectuals rediscovered the art and ideals of antiquity, they didn't just study philosophy and architecture, they studied Roman portraiture. Noblewomen in city-states like Florence and Venice, seeking to connect themselves to the perceived glory and virtue of the ancient Roman matron, began to emulate these intricate styles. They saw in the elaborate braids and coils of the empresses a perfect way to display their own family's wealth, refinement, and cultural knowledge. The result was a breathtaking revival of Roman coiffure. Renaissance portraits are filled with women whose hair is meticulously parted down the center, then woven into complex networks of braids that were often intertwined with pearls, ribbons, and even fine gold netting, creating looks that were direct, conscious homages to the ancient world. This revival cemented a concept in European aristocratic circles that would persist for centuries, that an elaborate, time-consuming hairstyle was a direct indicator of a woman's elevated social position. If your hair was built into a magnificent structure that took hours to create, it was a clear signal that you did not engage in manual labor and had the resources to employ attendants for such meticulous work. The Roman ideal, reborn in the Renaissance, set a precedent that evolved through the extravagant powdered wigs of the 18th century French court, which took the concept of the Roman wig to its logical, extreme conclusion, right into the modern era. The desire to use hair as a statement of style, identity, and power, so brilliantly mastered by the Romans, remains a fundamental part of our fashion DNA today. Of course, the Roman army's influence wasn't limited to what they wore on their feet or how they fastened their cloaks. Their entire military kit became the ultimate symbol of power, discipline, and technological superiority, a blueprint that European armies would look to for centuries. When you picture a Roman legionary, you likely see the distinct bands of steel strapped across his torso, the iconic lorica segmentata. This was a marvel of ancient military engineering, a flexible armor made from overlapping iron strips fastened to internal leather straps. It offered far superior protection to the chainmail worn by many of Rome's enemies, deflecting blows and distributing impact across the entire torso rather than concentrating it on a single point. But its genius also lay in its modularity. If a section was damaged in battle, a soldier could simply replace a single band rather than the entire costly cuirass. This combination of protection, flexibility, and logistical efficiency made the Roman legionary a formidable and resilient force on any battlefield. While the lorica segmentata is the most visually recognizable piece of Roman equipment, its direct imitation in the early Middle Ages was limited, largely because the complex industry required to produce and maintain it collapsed with the Western Empire. However, the principles behind its design did not vanish. The focus on protecting the torso with articulated, overlapping plates is a concept that echoes through the evolution of European armor. We can see a clear conceptual link between the segmented Roman design and the segmented arm and leg protectors, the lames, worn by knights in the 14th century. This eventually evolved into the full-plate armor of the 15th and 16th centuries, which itself was a system of interconnected steel plates designed for maximum protection and mobility, the spiritual and technological successor to the Roman model. The Roman army had effectively established a gold standard for what personal armor should achieve, and centuries later, European metalworking finally caught up and advanced the idea. Perhaps the most immediately adopted and enduring element of the Roman military wardrobe was the sagum, a heavy woolen cloak that was practically the uniform of the frontier. This simple rectangular blanket, usually dyed in a deep red or brown, was fastened at the right shoulder with a fibula, leaving the sword arm completely free for action. It was rugged, versatile, and provided essential protection from the cold and rain for soldiers stationed across the empire, from the damp mists of Britannia to the windy peaks of the Alps. Its design was so effective and so synonymous with Roman military might that it was eagerly adopted by the very peoples who once fought against the legions. As Germanic tribes began to form the kingdoms that would replace Roman rule in the West, their chieftains and warriors consciously adopted the sagum. Wearing it was a powerful statement. It was a way to claim the authority, discipline, and prestige of the Roman military for themselves. This adoption is a crucial, often overlooked link in the chain of European fashion history. The sagum did not disappear. It evolved, becoming the standard military cloak of the early Middle Ages. You can see its direct descendant in the cloaks worn by Carolingian soldiers and, most famously, in the Norman knights depicted on the Bayeux tapestry. These 11th century warriors are shown with cloaks fastened at the shoulder in an identical manner to the Roman sagum, a clear visual continuity spanning 600 years. This style persisted as a staple of military dress for knights and men-at-arms throughout the medieval period. The practical benefits were undeniable, but the symbolic weight was even greater. By wearing this Roman-inspired garment, a medieval knight was unconsciously connecting himself to a long tradition of martial order and imperial power, wrapping himself in the legacy of the greatest army the world had ever known. The simple cloak of a Roman soldier became an unbroken thread, stitching together the battle dress of antiquity with that of the emerging knightly class, whose own code of honor and warfare would go on to define the European Middle Ages. But the story of Roman fashion influence goes far deeper than the cut of a garment. It's woven into the very threads and imbued with the very colors they prized most highly. The fabrics themselves and the dyes used to color them were perhaps the most potent status symbols of all, communicating wealth and power in a language that every eye could understand. While wool and linen formed the comfortable, everyday foundation of the Roman wardrobe, it was the pursuit of luxury textiles that truly revealed their ambitions and their vast trade networks. The most coveted fabric of all was silk, a shimmering, exotic import from the distant land of Seers, what we now know as China. This incredibly light and lustrous material was, ounce for ounce, worth more than gold. It was so highly prized that the Roman Senate periodically issued edicts trying to ban its use, fearing the vast amounts of wealth flowing out of the empire to pay for it and decrying its perceived decadence. But the allure was simply too strong for the elite, who flaunted silk garments as the ultimate demonstration of their global reach and almost limitless means. Yet even more legendary than the fabric itself was a color, Tyrian purple. This wasn't just a dye, it was a phenomenon, a symbol of absolute power that was quite literally worth its weight in silver. Produced from the mucus secretions of a specific species of sea snail found primarily off the coast of Phoenicia, the process of creating this dye was horrifically complex and staggeringly expensive. It took thousands of snails to produce a single gram of dye, and the extraction and fermentation process produced a smell so foul that dye works had to be located downwind of cities. The result, however, was a color unlike any other, a deep, rich, vibrant purple that did not fade with time, but grew brighter and more intense when exposed to sunlight. This miraculous quality made it seem almost divine. Unsurprisingly, its use was heavily restricted by sumptuary laws. Initially, only the broad purple border on a toga praetexta was permitted for high-ranking magistrates. But as the Republic gave way to the Empire, the emperors claimed it for themselves entirely. Wearing a toga dyed entirely in Tyrian purple, the toga picta became the exclusive right of the emperor, a visual declaration of his supreme authority. This Roman obsession with purple as the color of royalty did not fade with the empire. It was its most enduring export. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire in Constantinople carried the torch forward with even greater fervor. Byzantine emperors wrapped themselves so completely in Tyrian purple that the very term, born in the purple, was coined for children born to a reigning emperor in the special purple-hued palace chamber, signifying their supreme legitimacy. The color became so synonymous with Byzantine imperial power that when a Crusader army sacked Constantinople in 1204, they were reportedly awestruck by the vast stores of purple silk they found in the imperial treasury. The concept of purple as the exclusive color of royalty then leaped from the Bosporus to the courts of medieval Europe. It was adopted by the Catholic Church for the robes of cardinals and bishops, linking spiritual authority to imperial tradition. Throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, kings and queens across Europe, desperate to legitimize their rule and connect themselves to the glory of Rome, enacted strict laws reserving the use of the most expensive purples for themselves and their immediate court. Even as new chemical dyes eventually replaced the precious snail-based ones, the association of deep purple with nobility, luxury, and power remained unbroken, a direct inheritance from the sun-drenched forums and imperial palaces of ancient Rome. The reach of Roman fashion was never just about the passive influence of a dominant culture. It was actively exported, adopted, and adapted through two powerful, interconnected forces: the unstoppable march of the legions and the bustling networks of commerce that followed in their wake. Military conquest didn't just redraw the map of Europe, it laid down the very roads that would become the arteries for a new, shared sartorial culture. When a Roman army established a garrison or a fortress town, it wasn't just soldiers who arrived. A whole supporting economy would spring up around the camp: traders, merchants, craftsmen, and families, all bringing Roman goods and Roman tastes with them. In places like Roman Britain or Gaul, local chieftains and elites quickly realized that aligning with Rome offered immense benefits. Adopting Roman dress was a powerful way to signal this allegiance, to show that they were part of the new, sophisticated ruling class and not the conquered barbarians. They began to wear the tunica, fasten their cloaks with Roman-style fibulae, and even struggled into the cumbersome toga for official ceremonies, using clothing as a tool for social and political climbing within the new imperial hierarchy. This cultural exchange was far from one-sided. While Rome exported its aesthetic, it also eagerly imported ideas and styles from the provinces, creating a fascinating feedback loop of fashion. Consider the garment that most famously defined the barbarian in the Roman mind: trousers or bracchi. To the Romans, who associated bare legs with civilization and covered ones with the uncivilized peoples of the north, trousers were initially an object of ridicule and disdain. However, for soldiers stationed in the freezing climates of northern Britain or the German frontier, the practical advantages of the local dress became impossible to ignore. The Roman military, ever pragmatic, began to adopt these woolen trousers for their troops, integrating them into the uniform of the empire's defenders. This is a perfect example of how cultural exchange on the frontiers worked. A practical item from a conquered culture was absorbed by the Roman machine, lost its barbarian stigma, and was disseminated across the empire, eventually becoming a standard part of European dress for centuries to come. The engine for this continuous exchange was the incredible network of Roman roads and sea lanes that connected the vast empire. These routes were built for the rapid movement of legions, but they became the superhighways for trade, allowing goods and the styles they represented to flow over thousands of miles. A wealthy matron in a villa in Gaul could wear a bracelet made from British jet, fastened with a brooch from Italy, while her husband might don a cloak made from Spanish wool, dyed with Phoenician purple. This wasn't just about luxury, even everyday items proliferated. The distinct style of Romano-British pottery, for instance, or the specific design of a common fibula, can be traced along these trade routes, showing how a localized style could become widespread. Roman glassware, much of it produced in workshops in Germany and Gaul, has been found from Scotland to the Black Sea, demonstrating the sheer volume and reach of this commercial network. Perhaps the most profound impact was felt in the cities that Romans founded or dramatically expanded across Europe. Places like London, Paris, Cologne, and Vienna began as Roman military settlements or trading posts and grew into major urban centers. These cities became powerful hubs of Roman culture, where the visual language of power, the forum, the basilica, the public baths, was reinforced by the clothing of its inhabitants. In these urban environments, to see people dressed in togas, stolas, and Roman tunics was normal. This created a stark visual contrast between the Romanized urban elite and the rural populations who often held on to their traditional clothing styles for much longer. This divide between urban Roman fashion and rural traditional dress would echo for generations, shaping the cultural identities of these regions long after the legions had departed. The foundation was laid for a unified European aesthetic, where the classical ideals of Rome were never entirely forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered and reinvented when the time was right. When the last Roman emperor was deposed in the West in the late 5th century, the sophisticated imperial bureaucracy that regulated everything from the grain supply to the production of textiles collapsed. But the millions of people living across the former empire did not suddenly stop getting dressed in the morning. The transition from the classical world to the medieval era was not a clean break, but a gradual, complex transformation, and the story of clothing provides one of the most tangible links between these two ages. In the so-called Dark Ages, the practical, versatile garments of Rome didn't vanish. They were adapted, simplified, and slowly merged with the styles of the Germanic peoples who now ruled these lands, creating the foundation of what we now recognize as medieval European fashion. The humble Roman tunica, that universal base layer, is the most direct and enduring example of this continuity. Its basic T-shaped construction, simple to weave and easy to wear, remained the fundamental garment for men and women of all classes for centuries. In the post-Roman world, this tunica simply acquired a new name in the evolving Latin vernacular. It became the tunica or cotta, worn by Anglo-Saxon farmers, Frankish nobles, and Byzantine emperors alike. Its form was remarkably consistent. The primary evolution was in the details of its cut and decoration. While a Roman tunica was often relatively loose and draped, its early medieval descendant was frequently cut more generously, with wider sleeves and a fuller body, perhaps to allow for layering in the colder climates of northern Europe. The Roman use of clavi, those colored vertical stripes denoting rank, faded away, replaced by decorative trims called orbiculi and tablia, embroidered or woven roundels and square panels that were applied to the hem, cuffs, and shoulders. This shift in decoration reflects the changing sources of status, moving from the civic hierarchy of Rome to the martial aristocracy of the new Germanic kingdoms, where wealth was displayed through ornate, handcrafted detail rather than a standardized system of stripes. Just as the tunica evolved into the coat, the Roman military cloak, the sagum, found a new lease on life. Its practical, rectangular design, fastened at the shoulder with a brooch, was perfectly suited to the needs of the new elite, the mounted warrior. The early medieval knight, much like the Roman legionary before him, required a garment that offered protection from the elements without restricting movement in combat. The sagum's descendant, often now referred to simply as a cloak or mantle, became a staple of the medieval wardrobe. For the highest echelons of society, this garment took on a new level of symbolic importance. The ceremonial cloaks of Merovingian and Carolingian kings, as depicted in manuscripts and mosaics, are clearly in the Roman tradition. The most famous example is the magnificent cloak of Roger II, the Norman king of Sicily, crafted in the 12th century from crimson silk and gold thread and embroidered with a lion conquering a camel, a stunning piece of regalia that would not have looked out of place on the shoulders of a late Roman emperor, its design a powerful claim to imperial authority. Perhaps the most surprising and profound preservation of Roman sartorial tradition occurred within the walls of monasteries, as secular fashion in the emerging kingdoms began to blend Roman forms with Germanic tastes like trousers and shorter tunics. Christian monastic orders consciously looked back to the late Roman era for their model of dress. The simple, humble clothing of the early monks was directly inspired by the attire of the common Roman citizen of the 3rd and 4th centuries, a period when Christianity was first becoming established. The monastic habit, with its loose tunica and enveloping hooded cloak, is a deliberate and conservative fossilization of everyday Roman dress. This was a conscious choice to embody piety and reject worldly vanity by adhering to the simpler styles of the past. In preserving their own sacred uniform, Europe's monasteries became unwitting museums of Roman clothing technology and form, ensuring that the draped silhouette and construction techniques of the ancient world were never entirely lost, quietly echoing through the centuries in the silent corridors of cloisters. This unbroken thread from the common Roman tunic to the monk's habit represents one of fashion's most enduring and purposeful legacies. After centuries where the draped silhouettes of Rome were preserved mainly in monastic habits and the faint memory of stone carvings, the classical world was spectacularly reborn during the Renaissance. This wasn't just a rediscovery of philosophy and art, it was a full-blown fashion revolution, where the elite of Europe looked directly to the statues and ruins of antiquity to redefine elegance and authority. The trigger for this sartorial time travel was the unearthing of ancient Roman sculptures, like the Laocoon, in Rome itself during the early 16th century. For the first time in a millennium, artists and intellectuals could study the precise folds of a toga, the intricate braids of an empress, and the elegant drape of a stola with their own eyes. This wasn't dry academic study, it was the ultimate source of inspiration. Painters like Raphael and Titian began depicting biblical and mythological figures not in medieval gowns, but in perfectly rendered Roman attire, making the classical look the new visual language of power, beauty, and virtue. The epicenter of this trend was Italy, where wealthy merchant families like the Medici in Florence and the Sforzas in Milan were amassing fortunes that rivaled those of kings. Eager to legitimize their new power and connect themselves to the glorious past of the Roman Republic, they became passionate patrons of this classical revival. For men, this meant a dramatic shift away from the form-fitting doublets and hose of the medieval period towards a looser, more dignified silhouette. They adopted long, flowing gowns, often made of rich velvet or damask, cut with wide sleeves that recalled the drape of a toga. These robes, known as lucco in Florence, were worn open and unbelted, creating a stately columnar shape that evoked the gravitas of a Roman senator. This was a conscious rejection of the martial, armored look of the medieval knight in favor of the image of a civilized statesman, a man of letters and civic duty. The message was clear: their authority came not from the sword, but from wisdom and a direct lineage to the classical ideals of governance. For women, the Renaissance interpretation of Roman fashion was even more transformative. The high waistline of the Roman stola, sitting just under the bust, became the defining feature of the most iconic garment of the era, the Renaissance gamura or gown. This style, now often called the empire waist, created a long, flowing column of fabric that fell straight to the floor, a deliberate and direct homage to the statues of Roman matrons. Women abandoned the tight lace corsets and complex layered sleeves of previous generations in favor of a softer, more natural form that echoed classical ideals of beauty. They accessorized with large, rectangular shawls draped over their shoulders or veiled over their hair, perfectly mirroring the function and style of the Roman palla. Their hair, as we discussed, became a masterpiece of classical revival, with center parts and intricate braids woven with pearls, directly copying the hairstyles of empresses like Faustina the Younger that they saw on ancient coins and newly excavated busts. This Italian Renaissance obsession quickly spread north, most powerfully to the French court when Catherine de' Medici, a Florentine noblewoman, married the future King Henry II of France. She arrived with an entire wardrobe of the latest Italian fashions and a court full of tailors and artisans, effectively importing the entire classical revival to Paris. The French court, always a trendsetter, embraced and adapted these styles, blending them with their own tastes to create an even more spectacular and lavish court dress. This cross-pollination of ideas ensured that the classical look wasn't a fleeting Italian trend, but became the foundation of European aristocratic fashion for the next 200 years. The fascination with all things Roman reached a second, even more intense peak in the late 18th and early 19th centuries during the neoclassical movement. Fueled by new archaeological discoveries at Pompeii and Herculaneum, a new generation looked to antiquity for inspiration. This time, the style became startlingly literal. Women's fashions like the chemise Oloriani, made famous by Marie Antoinette, were simple high-waisted white muslin dresses that were near replicas of the Roman tunica, often accessorized with cashmere shawls that replaced the palla and even sandals tied around the ankle in the classical style. This second wave of classical revival, from the dignified robes of a Florentine banker to the simple muslin dresses of a Parisian socialite, proves just how deeply the image of Rome was woven into the European imagination, serving as an endless source of sartorial inspiration for anyone wanting to signal refinement, intellect, and a connection to a glorious past. Yet the pendulum of fashion is always in motion, and the rigid formality of the Baroque court would eventually give way to something far more playful and delicate. By the early 18th century, a new style emerged from the French court that seemed at first glance to be the absolute opposite of the Roman ideal, the Rococo. Where Baroque was powerful and dramatic, Rococo was light, airy, and whimsical, filled with pastel colors, asymmetrical curls, and themes of love and pastoral pleasure. But even in this seemingly frivolous world of silk and lace, the underlying principles of Roman design endured, not in the heavy symbolism of power, but in the very way fabric was conceptualized and manipulated. The Rococo obsession with drapery was, in its own way, a direct descendant of the classical tradition. Look closely at a painting by Francois Boucher or Jean-Honoré Fragonard from this period. The subjects are no longer dressed as gods or senators. They are aristocratic ladies and gentlemen at leisure in idealized gardens, but notice how their clothing is portrayed. Gowns are not simply worn, they are artfully arranged. Soft silks and satins are depicted as if caught in a gentle breeze, billowing out behind a figure or delicately slipping from a shoulder to suggest a casual, almost careless elegance. This treatment of fabric, celebrating its flow, its texture, and its ability to create soft, natural folds, is a direct homage to the classical understanding of drapery seen in Roman statuary. The Romans mastered the art of carving marble to look like soft cloth clinging to the body, and Rococo painters applied that same principle to pigment, using brushstrokes to create a sense of movement and fluidity that brought static portraits to life. It was a different interpretation of the same classical lesson, that fabric should enhance the human form, not conceal it. This classical influence extended beyond painting and into the actual construction of Rococo dress. While the shapes were vastly different from a Roman stola, the design philosophy shared a common thread. The most formal gown for women, the robe à la Française, featured a bodice that opened in the front to reveal an elaborately decorated stomacher, but its most distinctive element was the wattle back, named for the painter who popularized it. This was a single long piece of fabric cut full and wide, then pleated into the shoulders so that it fell in a graceful cascading train. From behind, the effect was strikingly reminiscent of a Roman palla or even the long, draped back of a toga, creating a silhouette that was both structured and effortlessly flowing. It was an architectural marvel of cloth that manipulated volume and line in a way that would have been deeply familiar to a Roman tailor, even if the final product was adorned with ribbons and flowers instead of a purple border. Even the elaborate accessories of the Rococo period carried faint echoes of ancient Rome. The intricate, often nature-themed jewelry featuring shells, flowers, and birds mirrored the Roman love for detailed metalwork and natural motifs. The delicate silk shoes with their curved heels, while a world away from sturdy Roman calci, were equally a marker of elite status and a life free from manual labor. In the grand salons of Paris, where conversation and wit were prized above all, The ideal was not the stern virtue of a Roman matron, but the charming sophistication of a cultured individual. This new archetype of the philosopher or the cultured woman, engaging in intellectual debate, was itself a revival of a classical ideal. The Roman citizen engaged in civic discourse, albeit in a much more ornate and intimate setting. The Rococo, for all its surface-level frivolity, was still engaged in a continuous conversation with antiquity, reinterpreting its lessons on beauty, form, and social expression for a new modern age of enlightenment and luxury. If the Renaissance was the first great reawakening of classical style, then the 19th century was its spectacular, empire-sized encore. Following the chaos of the French Revolution, Europe craved a new kind of order, and it found its blueprint not in the recent past, but in the distant glory of Rome. This was the era of neoclassicism, a movement that swept through art, architecture, and fashion with an unprecedented literalness, driven by a powerful combination of fresh archaeological discovery and raw political ambition. The excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum, which had begun in the previous century, were now yielding stunningly well-preserved finds that captured the public imagination. For the first time, Europeans could see the vibrant colors of Roman frescoes, hold perfectly preserved glassware, and examine the intricate details of everyday life frozen in time. This wasn't just inspiring artists, it was directly influencing dressmakers, tailors, and the most powerful man on the continent, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon understood the potent symbolism of clothing better than almost any ruler before him. He recognized that to legitimize his new empire, he needed to connect it visually to the greatest empires of the past. He consciously styled himself as a new Roman emperor, and he used fashion as a primary tool to broadcast this message. For women, the high-waisted, columnar silhouette inspired by the Roman stola and tunica became the absolute height of fashion across Europe. These empire waist gowns, often made of sheer white muslin that clung to the body, were near-perfect replicas of the garments seen on ancient statues. Women abandoned the structured corsets and wide panniers of the previous era in favor of this new, seemingly liberated classical ideal. They accessorized with cashmere shawls that replaced the Roman palla, wore their hair in loose curls inspired by Roman busts, and even strapped on flat sandals tied around the ankle with ribbons, mimicking ancient caligae. This style was popularized by Napoleon's first wife, Josephine, who was a renowned fashion icon. Her patronage made the classical look not just a trend, but a requirement for anyone wishing to be seen at the sophisticated court of the new French Empire. But Napoleon's most calculated sartorial statements were reserved for the military and his own court officials. He completely redesigned military regalia to emulate the grandeur of Rome. His soldiers' uniforms featured classical elements like eagle-top standards, which directly copied the Roman aquila, the sacred symbol of a legion. The brassards and decorative elements on officers' coats often included imperial laurel wreaths and other motifs lifted straight from Roman armor. For his own coronation in 1804, Napoleon famously rejected the traditional robes of the French monarchy. Instead, he wore a magnificent white satin tunic embroidered in gold, a heavy coronation robe of crimson velvet lined with ermine, and a laurel wreath of golden leaves upon his head, an outfit meticulously crafted to resemble that of a Roman Caesar. He even commissioned the artist Jacques-Louis David to immortalize the event in a painting that consciously echoed the grandeur of imperial Roman portraiture. This was more than just a costume, it was a deliberate act of political theater designed to frame his reign as a continuation of imperial Roman glory. This neoclassical fervor was not confined to France. As Napoleon's influence spread across Europe through conquest and alliance, so did the aesthetic he championed. From Russia to Prussia, the courts of Europe adopted versions of this Roman-inspired style, using it to modernize their own national images. In England, the Regency style, championed by the Prince Regent, the future King George IV, embraced the high-waisted gown for women and the dark, tailored, form-fitting coats for men that evoked a new kind of Roman gravitas, a world away from the frills and lace of the previous century. This cross-continental adoption of a unified classical style helped forge a shared European cultural identity in the 19th century, one that looked back to a common ancient heritage, even as the nations themselves were often at war. The legacy of this era is still visible today in the formal uniforms of many military and diplomatic corps, where epaulettes, braiding, and classical motifs continue to whisper of a time when empires dressed themselves in the borrowed authority of ancient Rome. This dialogue between past and present is perhaps most vividly alive on the runways of Milan and Paris, where modern design titans consciously channel the spirit of ancient Rome to create clothing that feels both timeless and utterly contemporary. The connection isn't always a direct replica, it's often a subtle whisper of inspiration, a shared philosophy of power, drama, and the sensual interplay of fabric and form. Designers like Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, and more recently, brands like Valentino don't just reference Rome in passing. They engage in a full-blown conversation with its aesthetic legacy, proving that the principles of Roman style are as potent today as they were 2,000 years ago. Perhaps the most literal and enduring revival is the gladiator sandal, a style that seems to cycle back into high fashion with remarkable regularity. From the runways of the late 20th century to the streets of today, these strappy, intricate sandals are a direct homage to the footwear of Roman legionaries and arena combatants. While a modern designer's version might be crafted from the softest leather or adorned with gold hardware instead of iron hobnails, the DNA is unmistakable. The multiple straps winding up the calf, the open-toe construction, the focus on both structure and a hint of exposed skin, all of these elements echo the practical yet powerful design of the Roman caligae. When a model strides down the catwalk in a pair of towering gladiator-inspired heels, she is embodying the same fusion of strength and sensuality that the original sandals represented. It's a look that speaks of confidence, of a woman ready to conquer, whether her battlefield is a boardroom or a social event, but the Roman influence extends far beyond footwear. The entire concept of the draped dress, a cornerstone of many European luxury brands, is a masterclass in updating a classical principle. The Roman mastery of using fabric to sculpt the body, to create interest through folds and tension rather than through rigid structure, is a technique that designers constantly revisit. We see this in the fluid one-shoulder gowns that cascade over the form, reminiscent of how a toga or a palla would be artfully arranged. We see it in the elegant cowl necks and soft ruche details that create dynamic shadows and highlights, much like the intricate folds carved into marble statues. Designers like Versace have famously used jersey and silk to create gowns that are essentially modern stolas, columnar, graceful, and imbued with a sense of effortless authority. This isn't about recreating a costume, it's about harnessing the ancient understanding that fabric, when manipulated with skill, can be the most expressive element of a garment. The Roman appetite for unapologetic luxury and display finds its perfect parallel in the bold, opulent aesthetic of houses like Dolce & Gabbana. Their collections often serve as a lavish love letter to Italian history, with ancient motifs featuring prominently. Gold leaf patterns reminiscent of Roman mosaics adorn flowing silk dresses. Jeweled embroideries depict chariots, laurel wreaths, and mythological figures straight off a toga picta. Heavy statement jewelry in their collections, thick gold cuffs, elaborate collars, and intricate metalwork directly echoes the fibulae and torques worn by Roman elites. This is more than just decoration. It's a narrative about heritage, about placing modern luxury within a continuum of Italian artistry that stretches back to the empire. It tells a story of a culture that has always understood how to wield beauty and extravagance as tools of power and identity. Ultimately, what these designers have absorbed is not merely a set of visual cues, but the underlying Roman philosophy of dressing. The ancient world understood that clothing was a performance, a way to construct an identity and project it to the world. Whether it was the emperor in his purple, the senator in his striped tunic, or the matron in her draped stola, every garment was part of a visual language. Modern high fashion operates on exactly the same principle. A dramatic draped couture gown on the red carpet isn't just beautiful, it's a performance of elegance and status. A sharp minimalist white suit evokes the crisp authority of a modern-day senator. The relentless pursuit of the finest materials, the most luxurious silks, the most exquisite dyes, the most perfect leathers, is a direct continuation of the Roman quest for Tyrian purple and Chinese silk. Today's European runways are the new Roman Forum, where the same timeless values of power, beauty, and identity are still being negotiated, not with words, but with every stitch, drape, and fold. The unmistakable sound of an entire cohort marching in these hobnailed sandals, a rhythmic metallic clattering on stone roads, would have been a terrifying herald of Roman power to those who heard it approaching. But the caligae's influence extended far beyond its immediate military use. Its fundamental design principles of durability, breathability, and a sole engineered for grip were nothing short of revolutionary for the ancient world. We can trace a direct and unbroken line from these utilitarian sandals to the outdoor and work footwear of later centuries. The heavily nailed boots worn by medieval European soldiers and laborers, for instance, were a clear and pragmatic evolution of this Roman technology. Even the characteristic pattern of the caligae's upper, a web of sturdy leather straps, found its way into the design of medieval pilgrim shoes, which prioritized foot protection and ventilation during long, arduous journeys on foot to holy sites. The very idea that a shoe could be specifically engineered for purpose, be it marching, farming, or pilgrimage, is a concept that Roman footwear craftsmanship embedded deeply into the European tradition. For life within the city walls and for those of higher social standing, the open caligae was considered far too rustic and informal. Here, the shoe of choice was the calceus, a fully enclosed leather shoe that was a mandatory part of the formal Roman citizen's outfit when wearing a toga. The act of wearing closed shoes was itself a powerful sign of civilization, a deliberate distinction setting the Romans apart from the barbarian peoples who often wore boots or simple foot wraps. The calceus was a meticulously crafted item, made from soft, high-quality leather and available in specific styles and colors that denoted rank with precision. A common citizen might wear a simple, functional version, but a senator's calceus was distinctive, dyed a rich red and fastened with 4 sets of leather laces that wrapped around the ankle in a specific, recognizable manner. This particular style, sometimes referred to as the calceus patricius, was a potent visual cue of authority and senatorial status, a silent announcement of one's place in the hierarchy of power. This Roman emphasis on specialized footwear for different occasions and social classes planted a sophisticated seed in European fashion that would flourish for millennia. The concept that a gentleman should own different shoes for different purposes, sturdy riding boots for travel, elegant formal shoes for court, soft indoor slippers for private chambers, is a philosophy of dress that finds its clear roots in Roman practice. Furthermore, the Roman method of constructing shoes on a last, a foot-shaped form, was a significant technological advancement that allowed for more fitted, comfortable, and consistent footwear. This technique spread throughout the empire along with the legions and cobblers who served them, becoming the standard across Europe and forming the foundational knowledge of the shoemaking craft guilds that emerged in the Middle Ages. The Romans even had distinct styles for women, often featuring softer leathers and more delicate fastenings, reinforcing the idea that footwear was a key component of a complete and civilized wardrobe for all citizens. From the pragmatic, nailed design of the legionary's sandal to the symbolic power of the senator's red shoe, Roman footwear established a lasting legacy of combining sheer function with profound social meaning. This principle resonates in every pair of shoes we choose to wear today, whether we're lacing up hiking boots for a mountain trail or selecting elegant heels for a formal event. The Roman genius was to understand that what we put on our feet is never just about protection from the ground. It is a statement about who we are, what we do, and the world we aspire to walk through. The true artistry of Roman jewelry lay not just in the precious metals and stones, but in the breathtakingly intricate techniques perfected by their craftsmen. One of the most revered and complex methods was granulation, a process where tiny spheres of gold, each smaller than a pinhead, were meticulously arranged and fused onto a gold surface to create elaborate geometric patterns, filigree, or even depict miniature scenes from mythology. The skill required to heat the minute gold balls to a temperature that would bond them to the base without melting them entirely was extraordinary, a closely guarded secret that resulted in jewelry with a mesmerizing, textured luminosity. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a dazzling display of technical virtuosity and patience, a testament to the wearer's ability to commission something of such exquisite, painstaking detail. Alongside granulation, the art of the cameo flourished. Roman artisans expertly carved layered stones like sardonyx, using the contrasting colored bands to create raised, often portrait-style images in white against a darker background. These were more than pretty baubles, they were personal and political statements. A cameo might feature the portrait of an emperor, a beloved family member, or a god, serving as a protective amulet, a symbol of loyalty, or a fashionable accessory all at once. When the political power of Rome shifted east to Constantinople, its artistic soul moved with it. Byzantine craftsmen didn't just adopt Roman jewelry techniques, they elevated them to new heights of spiritual and imperial splendor. The subtle elegance of Roman granulation was often incorporated into the overwhelmingly opulent style of the Byzantine court, where the primary goal was to reflect the divine light of heaven itself. Jewelry became a form of devotion, with crosses and religious pendants crafted using these ancient methods. However, the true Byzantine innovation was in the use of color and light. They embraced cloisonné enameling, a technique where thin metal wires were soldered onto a surface to create cells, which were then filled with colored powdered glass and fired, creating vibrant, jewel-like areas of color that complemented the intricate goldwork. This fusion of Roman metalworking skill with a new chromatic intensity created a distinct aesthetic that would define luxury for centuries. Byzantine emperors and empresses were literally covered in this magnificence, their regalia so heavily adorned with pearls, polished cabochon gems, and elaborate goldwork that they were seen as living icons, the earthly representatives of celestial authority. This style became the ultimate luxury export, coveted by royalty from the Franks to the Rus, who sought to emulate this connection to Roman imperial prestige and Christian piety through the jewelry they wore. For centuries, the techniques of granulation and cameo carving remained the preserve of highly specialized artisans, often within monastic workshops or royal courts. Their journey into the broader European consciousness was dramatically fueled by a series of spectacular archaeological discoveries in the 18th and 19th centuries. The excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, captured the public's imagination like never before. Here were not just ruins, but perfectly preserved homes, their owners' most precious possessions frozen in time. Among the ash, archaeologists uncovered exquisite examples of Roman jewelry, gold armlets with finely granulated patterns, elegant rings, and stunning cameos. These finds were widely publicized through drawings, exhibitions, and eventually photography, creating a sensation. For the first time, European jewelers and the wealthy public could see the actual objects that had previously been known only from vague descriptions in texts or weathered stone carvings. This wasn't inspiration from a distance, it was a direct line to the source, and it ignited a furious passion for all things classical. This passion crystallized during the Victorian era, a period defined by its fascination with history and symbolism. The neoclassical revival evolved into a more archaeological and sentimental approach. Queen Victoria herself was an ardent admirer of cameos, frequently wearing them and setting a powerful trend throughout her empire. Victorian jewelers, armed with illustrated catalogs from the Italian excavations, began producing a vast array of revival pieces. They mastered the lost art of granulation, creating delicate, romantic pieces that echoed the texture of ancient Etruscan and Roman originals. Cameos experienced an unprecedented boom, carved not only in traditional sardonyx but also in shell, which made them affordable to the burgeoning middle class. These cameos often featured classical profiles of goddesses or romanticized scenes, connecting the wearer to an idealized past of beauty and myth. This revival was more than just fashion. It was a way for Victorians to express their education, their refinement, and their place in an empire that saw itself as the natural heir to Rome's civilizing mission. The jewelry became a tangible link to antiquity, a piece of history that could be worn on a brooch, a bracelet, or a necklace, allowing every woman to participate in the grand narrative of classical revival. Beyond the cut and style of the garments themselves, the very fabric of Roman fashion, the threads, the dyes, the very way cloth was created, represented a technological supremacy that Europe would spend centuries trying to replicate. The Romans didn't just wear clothes, they mastered the entire process of creating them, from the simple backstrap loom to the vast state-subsidized dye works that produced colors so vivid, they became legends. This deep knowledge of textiles formed the unbreakable backbone of their sartorial influence, a set of skills and techniques so effective that they became the bedrock of European cloth production for over a millennium. At the heart of this industry was the Roman loom, a robust and ingeniously efficient vertical two-beam loom that represented a significant leap forward from simpler devices. This loom allowed weavers to produce wider and longer bolts of cloth with greater speed and consistency, fueling the needs of a massive army and a vast civilian population. While the basic principle of weaving is ancient, the Roman systematization of it was key. They established large-scale workshops, often run by wealthy patrons or the state itself, where teams of weavers, many of them women, could produce standardized textiles. This wasn't just cottage industry craft, it was early industrial production. The most common fabric was wool, prized for its warmth and durability, and the Romans became experts in breeding sheep for different grades of fleece, from the coarse wool used for soldiers' cloaks to the incredibly soft, fine wool from Tarentum that was as luxurious as silk. Linen woven from flax was the other workhorse, valued for its coolness in the Mediterranean heat and used for everything from under tunics to sails. The efficiency of the Roman loom and their organized approach to textile manufacture created a surplus of cloth that was essential for trade and for dressing an empire, setting a precedent for scale that would not be seen again in Europe until the late Middle Ages. Perhaps the most dazzling aspect of Roman textile technology, however, was their absolute command of color. They transformed the simple act of dyeing cloth into a sophisticated alchemy, using the natural world to create a vibrant palette that spoke a clear language of status. While they used a wide range of dyes from plants like weld for yellow, madder root for red, and woad for blue, their pursuit of the most prestigious colors drove innovation to incredible extremes. The ultimate symbol of this was, of course, Tyrian purple, but other exclusive shades were also highly sought after. A particular shade of crimson, known as cocum or kermes, was derived from the dried bodies of a specific insect found on Mediterranean oak trees. It took tens of thousands of these tiny insects to produce a single pound of dye, making it almost as expensive as purple and another clear marker of elite wealth. The Romans understood that the true magic wasn't just in the dye source, but in the process of mordanting, the use of metallic salts like alum to fix the dye to the fiber, preventing it from washing out or fading quickly. Their mastery of different mordants allowed them to achieve a stunning range of shades from a single dye plant, creating a rich and lasting color fastness that was the envy of the ancient world. When the centralized Roman economy fragmented, this profound knowledge of weaving and dyeing did not vanish. Instead, it retreated into the monasteries and scattered workshops of early medieval Europe, preserved as an essential craft. For centuries, local production continued on a much smaller scale, using the same Roman-era looms and dye recipes. The real renaissance of these techniques began in the specific regions that could access the necessary raw materials. In medieval Flanders, a perfect storm of geography and ingenuity occurred. The low-lying, damp pastures were ideal for raising sheep, providing a plentiful supply of high-quality wool. The Flemish people, building directly upon the Roman foundation, didn't just replicate the techniques, they refined them to an astonishing degree. They developed larger, more complex looms operated by teams of highly skilled weavers, transforming their cities like Bruges, Ghent, and Ypres into the cloth-making capitals of Europe. Flemish weavers became renowned for their tight, even weaves and their rich, deep colors, particularly their brilliant scarlets and blacks, which were achieved through sophisticated overdying processes with woad and madder that would have made a Roman dyer proud. Their cloth became the most sought-after luxury commodity in the medieval world, traded from London to Constantinople, and it was this economic powerhouse, built on refined Roman technology, that funded the magnificent Gothic cathedrals and the rise of a powerful merchant class. Simultaneously, in Renaissance Italy, a different kind of textile revolution was taking place, one that looked back to Roman luxury for its inspiration. While cities like Florence were famous for their fine woolens, it was the Italian mastery of silk that truly echoed the opulence of ancient Rome. With the Crusades opening up trade routes to the East, Italian city-states like Lucca, Venice, and later Florence began importing raw silk and, crucially, the knowledge of sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms. They combined this with their own expertise in weaving and dyeing, soon establishing a domestic silk industry that broke the Byzantine and Arab monopolies. Italian weavers using advanced versions of the drawloom, a complex device that allowed for intricate patterned weaves, began producing silks that were breathtaking in their complexity. They wove elaborate designs featuring pomegranates, griffins, and other classical motifs into shimmering damasks and velvets, fabrics so heavy with gold and silver thread that they stood on their own. The dye houses of Venice became legendary, using the same precious kermes, insects, and alum mordants the Romans prized to achieve colors of unparalleled depth and brilliance on the luxurious silk. In doing so, the Italian Renaissance didn't just paint and sculpt like the Romans. It dressed its citizens in fabrics that directly rivaled and then surpassed the ancient world's most coveted textiles, wrapping the modern era in the resurrected glory of Rome. This classical obsession with hair as a symbol of status and sophistication did not die with the last Roman emperor. It lay dormant, preserved in marble and manuscript, until it was spectacularly resurrected over 1,000 years later during the Italian Renaissance. As artists and intellectuals rediscovered the art and ideals of antiquity, they didn't just study philosophy and architecture, they studied Roman portraiture. Noblewomen in city-states like Florence and Venice, seeking to connect themselves to the perceived glory and virtue of the ancient Roman matron, began to emulate these intricate styles. They saw in the elaborate braids and coils of the empresses a perfect way to display their own family's wealth, refinement, and cultural knowledge. The result was a breathtaking revival of Roman coiffure. Renaissance portraits are filled with women whose hair is meticulously parted down the center, then woven into complex networks of braids that were often intertwined with pearls, ribbons, and even fine gold netting, creating looks that were direct, conscious homages to the ancient world. This revival cemented a concept in European aristocratic circles that would persist for centuries, that an elaborate, time-consuming hairstyle was a direct indicator of a woman's elevated social position. If her hair was built into a magnificent structure that took hours to create, it was a clear signal that you did not engage in manual labor and had the resources to employ attendants for such meticulous work. The Roman ideal, reborn in the Renaissance, set a precedent that evolved through the extravagant powdered wigs of the 18th century French court, which took the concept of the Roman wig to its logical, extreme conclusion, right into the modern era. The desire to use hair as a statement of style, identity, and power, so brilliantly mastered by the Romans, remains a fundamental part of our fashion DNA today. Yet long after the last Roman senator was laid to rest, the toga's powerful silhouette was far from forgotten. It lingered in the collective memory of the West, preserved in stone and manuscript, waiting for a moment to be summoned back as a symbol. That moment arrived with thunderous force during the Enlightenment and the revolutions it inspired. As European thinkers and revolutionaries looked for a visual language to express their break from monarchical tyranny, they found the perfect emblem not in their recent past, but in the distant ideal of the Roman Republic. The toga, once the uniform of Rome's citizen legislators, was resurrected as the ultimate garment of liberty, civic virtue, and the rule of law. It was no longer a piece of clothing. It had been distilled into a potent political idea. This symbolic revival is perhaps most vividly captured in the art of the late 18th and 19th centuries. Jacques-Louis David, the master painter of the French Revolution, became the chief architect of this neoclassical visual propaganda. In his iconic works, he draped his subjects not in the silks and wigs of the French aristocracy, but in the clean, heroic lines of the Roman toga. His painting, The Oath of the Hairstyles, is a masterclass in this symbolism, depicting Roman citizens swearing a solemn oath, their bodies and intentions unified by the stark, white folds of their garments. For the revolutionaries, this image was a direct call to arms, equating their struggle with the noble simplicity and self-sacrifice of the ancient republic. When David turned his brush to portraying the leaders of the revolution itself, like in his famous unfinished portrait of the tennis court oath, he envisioned them in similar classical drapery, consciously linking their modern political act to the founding myths of Western democracy. The toga became the visual shorthand for a new kind of hero, not a king ordained by God, but a citizen motivated by duty and reason. The influence extended far beyond the canvas and into the very theater of revolutionary politics. Radical politicians like the Jacobins were often referred to as les Romains, the Romans, and they consciously adopted Roman manners and styles in their rhetoric and self-presentation. While wearing an actual woolen toga to a political meeting was impractical, the aesthetic was evoked through the use of classical motifs in architecture. the naming of institutions after Roman heroes, and the design of official costumes that echoed its draped form. This wasn't mere pageantry, it was a deliberate effort to ground a fragile new republic in the perceived stability and glory of antiquity. The message was clear: they were not creating something entirely new, but resurrecting a timeless ideal of civic participation that had been lost for centuries under the crown and the church. This powerful association between the toga and learned authority ensured its survival in one of the most enduring and visible aspects of modern life: academic regalia. The flowing gowns, hoods, and caps worn at university graduations across Europe and the Americas are the direct descendants of medieval clerical dress, which itself was a preservation of the late Roman civilian wardrobe. The scholars of the 12th and 13th centuries, often clerics, wore long, draped robes for warmth and dignity in unheated stone libraries and lecture halls. As universities became secularized, they retained this traditional garb, which by then was already centuries old. The specific colors and linings of the hoods denote fields of study, much like the colored stripes on a Roman tunica denoted social rank. When a doctoral candidate is hooded today, the ceremony is a direct, if unconscious, echo of a Roman citizen assuming the toga of manhood and responsibility. The academic robe is the toga's modern successor, a symbol of a different kind of authority, one derived from knowledge, debate, and intellectual rigor, continuing the Roman ideal that clothing can embody the highest values of a civilization. Even Roman children were dressed as tiny declarations of status and citizenship from their very first days. The journey began immediately after birth, when a freeborn Roman infant was presented with its first and most important accessory, the bulla. This was a small, hollow locket, typically made of gold for the wealthy or simple leather for those of more modest means, worn on a cord around the neck. Inside it held protective amulets or substances thought to ward off evil spirits and the evil eye. The bulla was not merely jewelry, it was a sacred object, a public announcement that this child was born free and under the protection of their family and the state. It was only removed when a boy came of age, around 14 or 15, during the ceremony where he exchanged his childhood garments for the pure white toga virilis of a man. For a girl, the bulla was typically set aside on her wedding day, symbolizing her transition from her father's protection to that of her husband. This practice of using specific items of dress to mark and safeguard childhood is a profound Roman concept that would deeply influence European traditions for centuries. The most visually striking garment for a Roman boy of a respectable family was his miniature toga praetexta, the same purple-bordered toga worn by high-ranking magistrates and senators. Seeing a young boy dressed in this scaled-down version of ultimate senatorial power was a powerful visual metaphor. It signaled his future potential and the civic destiny that awaited him, a constant reminder to himself and to society that he was being groomed for leadership. For everyday wear, however, children of both genders wore a simple tunica, much like their parents, allowing for the freedom of movement essential for play and learning. The key distinction for girls was that their tunics were often longer, preparing them for the modest, ankle-length stola they would adopt upon marriage. The materials, as always, spoke volumes. A child of an elite family might wear fine, soft linen or even silk, while a merchant's child would have worn sturdy wool, and a slave child likely nothing more than a rough, knee-length tunic. From their earliest moments, Romans were conditioned to understand that clothing was a map of one's place in the world. This Roman system of dressing the young to reflect their social standing and to mark life's major transitions did not vanish with the empire. Instead, it was absorbed and adapted by the emerging kingdoms of medieval Europe. The concept of the bulla, a protective amulet for an infant, evolved directly into the medieval and Renaissance practice of using coral teething rings and elaborately decorated insignias, or pilgrim badges, which were pinned to a child's clothing to ward off illness and misfortune. These items, often made of silver or polished coral, served the same dual purpose as the Roman bulla. They were both a spiritual safeguard and a public display of the family's means and care for their offspring. The tradition of marking a child's specific stage of life with a change of attire also persisted with remarkable strength. In medieval societies, both boys and girls often wore dresses or long tunics until the age of 6 or 7, a practical and largely gender-neutral approach to early childhood. The ceremony of a boy being breeched, where he exchanged his childish robes for his first pair of trousers or breeches, was a direct parallel to the Roman ceremony of a boy donning his toga of manhood. It was a monumental family event, symbolizing his entry into the masculine world of education and responsibility. The influence of the toga pretexts a specific symbolism, using a distinct border or color to denote privileged youth, can be traced in the formal wear of European aristocracy much later. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the sons of noble families were often depicted in portraits wearing elaborate suits that featured lavish silver or gold embroidery, froths of lace, and even touches of scarlet or purple. While not a direct copy, this extravagance in children's fashion served the same purpose as the purple stripe on the Roman toga. It set these children visually apart, announcing their inherited status and the lofty expectations placed upon them from birth. They were little lords dressed in the finery of their station, much like the young Roman scions who once walked the forum in their bordered togas. This philosophy that a child's clothing should reflect the honor of their family name rather than just practicality is a lasting legacy of Rome's nuanced understanding of sartorial power, proving that even the smallest citizens could carry the weight of tradition on their shoulders. And just as the toga and tunic found new life in the secular world, the sacred garments of Rome's state religion were seamlessly woven into the very fabric of a new faith, Christianity. This transformation is one of the most profound and enduring examples of Roman sartorial influence, where the vestments of pagan priests were not discarded but reinterpreted, becoming the powerful liturgical garments of the early Christian church across Europe. When Christianity transitioned from a persecuted sect to the official religion of the empire under Constantine, its leaders faced a practical challenge. They needed a visual language of authority and sanctity that would be immediately understandable within the Roman cultural context. They found it not by inventing something entirely new, but by looking to the established dress of the Roman upper class and its religious officials, sanctifying the everyday and turning it into the divine. Consider the casula, a common piece of outerwear for a Roman citizen of the 3rd and 4th centuries. This was a simple utilitarian garment, a large oval piece of cloth with a hole in the center, pulled over the head like a poncho. It was essentially a heavy-duty cloak designed to protect the wearer from rain and cold, and it was worn by all classes from farmers to philosophers. The early Christian clergy, who were often drawn from these same ranks of ordinary Roman citizens, simply continued to wear their everyday casula when leading worship. But over time, as their role became more distinctly sacerdotal, the functional garment took on a profound symbolic meaning. Its all-encompassing shape, which covered the entire body, came to represent the virtue of charity and the all-embracing yoke of Christ. The humble casula evolved into the chasuble, the most recognizable vestment worn by priests during the celebration of the Eucharist. Its fabric, often now rich silk or velvet, embroidered with crosses and other sacred symbols, a magnificent transformation from practical cloak to a garment of immense spiritual significance. Similarly, the stole, the long, narrow strip of fabric worn by deacons, priests, and bishops, has its direct origins in the Roman aurarium, a scarf denoting rank and office within the imperial bureaucracy. High-ranking officials would wear this scarf as a badge of their authority and their right to speak in public forums. The early church adopted this powerful symbol with its clear connotations of official duty and the right to teach, and consecrated it for its own ministers. The manner of wearing it signaled the specific order of clergy, draped over the left shoulder for deacons, crossing the chest for priests, and hanging straight down for bishops. This was a brilliant piece of cultural translation. It took a recognized symbol of Roman imperial authority and reassigned that authority to the Christian ministry, creating an instant visual hierarchy that was legible to a population steeped in Roman traditions of power and rank. Even the priest's alb, the long white linen tunic worn under the chasuble, is a direct descendant of the Roman tunica alba, or white tunic, which was a standard piece of underwear for all classes. Its purity of color made it a natural fit for the rituals of a new religion that emphasized spiritual purity and baptism. This practice of adopting and adapting everyday Roman dress was a masterstroke. It provided the young church with an instant and deeply rooted aesthetic of authority, allowing it to position itself not as a foreign invader, but as the legitimate heir to Roman order and civilization. The pagan past was not erased, it was baptized and resurrected, its symbols filled with new Christian meaning. This ensured that as the church spread across Europe, it carried with it this Roman visual DNA, making the Latin rite instantly recognizable from Ireland to Hungary, a unifying thread of sacred style in a fragmenting post-Roman world. While the elegant drapery of a toga was perfectly suited to the warm Mediterranean climate of Italy, the Roman Empire stretched into regions where such lightweight garments would have been impractical to the point of danger. As the legions marched north into the misty highlands of Britannia or east into the snowy forests of Germania, they encountered a fundamental challenge that would reshape their approach to dress: the weather. The genius of Roman fashion lay not just in its iconic styles, but in its remarkable capacity for adaptation. The empire didn't simply impose a single, rigid dress code. It allowed its aesthetics to be modified by necessity, leading to ingenious innovations that would fundamentally influence how Europeans dress for their own distinct seasons for centuries to come. The most immediate and practical response to colder climates was the simple, brilliant act of layering. In the frosty provinces, the basic tunica was no longer a standalone garment. A Roman soldier stationed on Hadrian's Wall would have worn a knee-length undertunic made of wool, topped with a second, thicker and often longer woolen tunic. On top of that, he would have his heavy hooded cloak, the pinula or sagum, which was essential for retaining body heat against the biting wind and relentless damp. This pragmatic approach to thermal regulation, building warmth through multiple removable layers, was a revolutionary concept in many parts of Europe. It stood in stark contrast to the single, heavy and often cumbersome animal skins or thick woven mantles traditionally worn by local populations. The Roman system was far more flexible. A soldier could remove a layer during exertion to avoid sweating, and then add it back during periods of inactivity to prevent a dangerous chill. This method was not only more comfortable, but also a critical factor in maintaining the health and effectiveness of the army in harsh environments. This principle of layering did not retreat with the legions. It was eagerly adopted by the local populations who had witnessed its advantages firsthand. In the post-Roman kingdoms that emerged across northern Europe, the multi-layered approach became the standard for dealing with the variable climate. The Roman undertunic evolved into the long-sleeved linen or wool shirt, while the overtunic became the foundation for the various tunics and gowns of the early medieval period. The practice of wearing a lighter base layer beneath a heavier outer garment became the bedrock of European seasonal fashion. It allowed for incredible versatility. By changing the weight, material, and number of layers, a person could comfortably navigate the shifting temperatures from morning to evening and from spring to winter. This adaptable system, pioneered out of Roman military necessity, is the direct ancestor of how we still dress today. Think of a cotton t-shirt under a wool sweater under a weatherproof jacket. The entire concept of a wardrobe, built for different seasons and activities, finds one of its earliest and most effective expressions in the Roman adaptation to Europe's diverse climates. Beyond just adding more cloth, the Romans also innovated with specific garments designed for protection against the elements. The pinula was a quintessential example of this. This was a heavy woolen cloak of Celtic origin that the Romans adopted and perfected. Its key feature was a rounded, hooded shape, often made from a single piece of felted wool, making it nearly waterproof. It was pulled over the head and fastened at the front, offering comprehensive protection from rain and snow. Another cold weather essential was the brachy, the woolen trousers we discussed earlier. Initially dismissed as barbaric, their unparalleled practicality for retaining leg warmth and allowing freedom of movement on horseback or during long marches in deep snow made them indispensable for Romans on the northern frontiers. The military also made use of knitted socks, leg wrappings called fasciae, and even rudimentary mittens. The legacy of these functional innovations is deeply woven into the fabric of European outerwear. The medieval hooded cloak, a staple for centuries for everyone from peasants to kings, is a direct descendant of the Roman pinula. Its practical design persisted because it worked so effectively for a pedestrian society living in a climate with cold, wet winters. The acceptance of trousers as a respectable and practical garment for men, which became universal in Europe after the fall of Rome, can be directly traced back to the Roman army's pragmatic adoption of them on the cold frontiers. Furthermore, the Roman focus on specialized gear for specific conditions planted a seed that would much later blossom into the entire concept of technical outdoor clothing. The idea that one's clothing should be actively engineered for environmental challenges, a principle demonstrated by the waterproof pinula and the insulating brachiae, is a foundational concept that eventually led to the development of everything from the oilskin coats of sailors to the high-performance Gore-Tex jackets of modern mountaineers. The Roman experience proved that true style wasn't just about looking powerful in the forum, but also about being smartly equipped to thrive anywhere on earth. This cultural exchange on the fringes of the empire was never a one-way street of Roman imposition. Instead, it sparked a fascinating and creative process of fusion, where local traditions met Roman aesthetics to birth entirely new hybrid styles. The result was not a dull, homogenized imperial fashion, but a vibrant enrichment of Europe's sartorial diversity, with each province developing its own distinct Romano-local identity. Nowhere is this beautiful blending more evident than in the metalwork of Celtic Roman Britain. The Celtic peoples were already master metalsmiths, renowned for their intricate, abstract designs featuring spirals, triskells, and flowing Latin patterns. When they encountered the advanced Roman metalworking techniques and new forms like the fibula, they didn't simply copy them, they reinvented them. A common Roman trumpet brooch, a functional piece of military hardware, might be transformed by a British craftsperson into a breathtaking work of art. Its surface could be embellished with brilliant red enamel, a technique the Celts perfected, inlaid into swirling Celtic motifs that danced around the classic Roman shape. The purely functional spring mechanism was Roman, but the soul of the object was utterly Celtic. This created a powerful new aesthetic language that allowed the local elite to participate in the Roman world without surrendering their own unique cultural heritage. They could wear a brooch that signaled their Roman affiliation and sophistication, while its decoration proclaimed their deep-rooted local identity and the supreme skill of their own artisans. A similar story of fusion unfolded in the sun-drenched province of Hispania, particularly in the south. Here, the local Iberian cultures had a long history of their own, with traditions of fine wool production and distinctive jewelry. Under Roman rule, the region became a major economic powerhouse, supplying olive oil, wine, and precious metals to the entire empire. This wealth fueled a unique cultural synthesis. Local elites in cities like Cordoba or Hispalis adopted the Roman toga for public life, but they might wear it with a finely woven Spanish cloak, renowned for its exceptional quality. The famous Roman philosopher Seneca, who was born in Hispania, noted the distinct character of his homeland. Iberian women became known for a particular style of wearing their hair, often adorned with intricate gold hairnets that blended Roman goldsmithing techniques with local design preferences. This wasn't about choosing one culture over the other. It was about selecting the most prestigious and appealing elements from both worlds to create a new, confident provincial identity. They were no longer purely Iberian, nor were they trying to be Romans from Italy. They were Hispano-Romans, and their fashion reflected this proud, blended reality. This process of fusion ensured that Roman influence was not a fleeting colonial phase, but was deeply embedded into the very fabric of local cultures. When the political power of Rome eventually receded, these hybrid styles did not vanish. They formed a resilient foundation that evolved into the distinct medieval fashions of these regions. In Britain, the enamel working techniques and metalworking styles that flourished in the Roman period survived in the post-Roman kingdoms of the Celts, resurfacing in the magnificent treasures of the Welsh and Irish early medieval period. The iconic hanging bowls of the Sutton Hoo burial, though Anglo-Saxon, show clear technical and artistic influences that can be traced back to this era of Romano-Celtic fusion. In Spain, the Visigoths, who later established a kingdom there, did not erase the existing culture. They absorbed it. Their magnificent treasures, such as the crown of Rexuswinth, features garnet and pearl inlay in gold, a technique that owes as much to the Roman and Hispano-Roman jewelry traditions as it does to Germanic styles. The Goths became the new elite, but they ruled a population whose material culture was already a rich blend of local and Roman, and this inheritance shaped the visual world of medieval Spain. This remarkable adaptability and creativity demonstrates that the true legacy of Roman fashion was not a rigid set of rules to be followed, but a dynamic vocabulary to be adapted, ensuring its influence would continue to evolve for centuries. From the stately dignity of the toga to the everyday utility of the tunica, the Romans built a visual language of identity that was too powerful to fade with the fall of an empire. We've traced how that language was spoken through the elegant drapery of a matron's stola, the formidable hobnailed soles of a legionary's caligae, and the intricate gold granulation of a senator's ring. These weren't just isolated trends, they were interconnected parts of a sophisticated system designed to communicate status, virtue, and power across a vast and diverse continent. The empire's true genius lay in its ability to export this system, allowing it to be adapted, adopted, and fused with local traditions from the misty highlands of Britannia to the sun-baked cities of Hispania, creating a rich tapestry of hybrid styles that would form the very foundation of European dress. This legacy is far from a relic confined to museums. It lives and breathes in the fabric of our world today. The next time you slip on a pair of strappy gladiator sandals, notice the elegant drape of a designer gown on the red carpet, or even put on a tailored overcoat, you're engaging with a conversation that began over 2,000 years ago. That high-waisted silhouette in a fashion magazine, a direct nod to the Roman stola, the academic robe worn at a graduation, the intellectual heir to the toga. The very idea that our clothing can project authority, professionalism, or creativity is a concept the Romans perfected and passed down through the centuries. So we want to hear from you. Have you spotted a Roman influence in a modern design or a period film that surprised you? Maybe you've seen a contemporary reinterpretation of a fibula brooch or noticed how classical draping is making a comeback. Share your observations in the comments below. We love seeing history through your eyes. If you've enjoyed this journey through the sartorial secrets of an empire and want to explore more mysteries of the ancient world, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. There are countless more stories woven into the fabric of history, and we can't wait to unravel them with you next time.